I'm not the man people picture when they hear the word adventure. I own a single pair of hiking boots, and they've spent more time under my coat rack than on dirt. The wildest thing I do most weeks is grab a roller dog at the gas station when I'm too tired to cook. My name is Evan Pierce. I'm 41, divorced 6 years, childless by circumstance and temperament, and I rent a second-floor one-bedroom off Scudder's Mill Road in Plainsboro, New Jersey. You've driven past my building and never noticed 2 long brick rectangles. Beige trim, parking lot that floods in a good rain, balconies that rattle when the wind blows hard enough. By late afternoon and most evenings, I'm at the shipping counter at the parcel place in Plainsboro Plaza. Brown aprons, thermal labels, the steady rattle of tape guns. People think that job is dull. Sometimes it is. But there's a pulse to ordinary errands you only catch if you learn the rhythm. A widower shipping a shoebox of taped-up 8mm tapes to his daughter in Ohio. A nurse overnighting medication on a Friday because the hospital pharmacy got it wrong on Thursday. An older veteran who always asks for the heaviest bubble mailers because they feel like something. If you listen, you hear entire lives flicker by in fragments. On nights I can't stand fluorescent lights anymore, I go fishing. I don't mean charter boats or big lakes with guys and expensive bass boats. I mean small water, trickles that pretend to be creeks, culverts so narrow you could step across. The kind of brooks you only see when winter strips the brush away. It's a stubborn, private kind of fishing that suits a stubborn, private kind of man. And that, more than anything else, explains how I ended up at Devil's Brook, out in the Plainsboro Preserve, on an evening when the air had the heavy breath of rain but never followed through. The preserve is one of those places that feels misplaced, 50 minutes from Manhattan by train, 15 from Princeton by car. And yet if you tuck yourself far enough into its back paths, the noise of the turnpike and Route 1 falls away until you can hear water talking to itself. There's a big Lake McCormack where kids come to try and fail at catching bluegill. There are boardwalks that keep your sneakers out of the muck, and blinds where the patient can watch birds that want nothing to do with people. But the real places, the places that stick to you, are thinner and harder to find. Devil's Brook isn't marked. Years ago, somebody must have known it, given it a name to match a story they always dobe it if there was a sign once. It's long gone. I'd noticed it a dozen times and told myself I'd go back when the grass lay down. On a late May Thursday, when I slapped closed on the glass at 9 and felt the sudden ache that comes with being alone too fast, I decided it was the night. I drove to the education center, parked under a sour yellow lamp that hummed like a bad tooth, slung my old ultralight rod over one shoulder, and carried a coffee can with night crawlers that smelled like pennies and dirt. Twilight in Oak Woods is not darkness so much as a deepening of color. Leaves go from a cheerful green to black green, then to a kind of blue you can't name. The boardwalk planks flexed under my weight, and the marsh on either side of me breathed. Somewhere far off, a kid yelled, and a parent yelled back, and then even that noise was gone. The air had that wet smell that brings on a memory you can't place. Old rain. The rubber of your childhood raincoat. Your father's cigarette after mowing the lawn. Finding the brook took a little bushwhack and a little pretending I'd meant to go the wrong way. When I finally saw it, I felt a prickle of pride you get when a map in your head turns out to be right. A ribbon of water not much wider than my bathtub, packed tight into roots and stones. I crouched, touched the surface with 2 fingers, felt the quick chill of water that had been in shade all day. Let's see what you are, I said to no one, or to the brook. People picture fishing as motion casting, reeling, big arcs of line, but most of it is waiting. Waiting teaches you how noisy you are, how often you shift your weight or clear your throat or decide your phone in your pocket is more interesting than the world. I hooked a worm neat and mean, eased it just ahead of a little drop, watched the line quiver, breathed, The last of the light threaded through a gap in the leaves and flashed on the surface like glass. That's when I realized the world had gone quiet in the wrong way. There is a good quiet. The kind you get when wind slides through tall grass and your brain steps aside to let your body listen. And then there's the quiet that follows a slammed door in a house where people haven't spoken in weeks. This was the second one. No birds. No distant traffic. No tree frogs practicing for June. Only the brook chattering to itself and the soft rasp of my breath. The first sound behind me was small, a brush of something against bark. The second was a deliberate scratch, like a key turned slowly in a lock. "Deer?" I said. Then, because I could feel my age. "Raccoon? You can have a worm if you ask nice." Something shuffled closer. I turned and saw nothing but layered dark. I told myself to relax. I told myself I'd spook whatever it was if I stood too fast. But the part of the human brain that's older than names kept muttering, "Turn, turn, turn." I cracked my tackle box, found my flashlight by feel, and thumbed it on. The beam caught on a shape across the crease of water, 20 feet away, crouched where roots knitted into a low bank. If I say it looked almost human, that will mislead you. Human is a net you throw when you're scared and want the world to make sense. It was short, maybe 4 feet. The skin was the color of wet cement and too even, as if it had been poured and smoothed. The arms were long in a way that makes your shoulders ache just imagining holding them out that far. And the hands weren't hands, but blades that happened to be arranged like fingers. The worst of it, what my mind still won't accept, even now, is the neck. It unfurled from the collarbone like a vine that had climbed too far and forgotten to stop, curved up and forward into a hook. On top of that hook, a head that was nearly all eyes, black, wet, glassy, without whites, without lids, no mouth, no nostrils, no ears I could see, just those eyes, fixed on me, as if I were a reflection it was trying to parse. I could have run. That would have been sane. Instead, because my brain protects me with jokes, I said, "Evening," like I'd met a neighbor in the laundry room. It tilted its head. The eyes caught the flashlight and did not blink. All at once, the sound that came wasn't heard so much as felt, like a hose forcing air through a reed, a wet, low hiss that vibrated the back of my teeth. It sprang. The rod in my hand snapped when I swung. A harmless plastic violence that still startled the thing enough that it tumbled into the narrow run. Water went everywhere. The hiss turned high and full of panic. I grabbed the first heavy thing I could, a moss glossy rock, and brought it down because the body remembers what to do when something with knives for fingers comes at your face. Once. Twice. The third time, I felt something give under the rock the way a crab shell gives if you step on it. The hiss thinned. The thing folded. The brook took it into itself up to the collarbones so that only the neck and head lay against stone. I dropped the rock. My hands shook. The slosh sound of my blood in my ears was louder than the water. There was a metallic taste, and I realized I'd bitten my tongue. I stared at it. Because when the world goes that far wrong, the only thing left is to try to make it right by memorizing it. I thought about calling someone. Animal control? A ranger? But what would I say? I imagined the radio static in the car of the first responder who'd have to write it up. I imagined the news. Local man discovers non-human animal in protected preserve. Says he was fishing. There would be questions. There would be humiliation. There would be, worst of all, the truth. I had killed something because I was afraid. By the time the sky finished turning from purple to the kind of black that never quite arrives in New Jersey, I was in my car. By the time I reached my building, I had talked myself halfway into a story where I'd been mistaken, where the shape I'd seen was branches. The hissing was wind and reeds. The rock never struck anything but mud. I showered, turned the water too hot, and stood there until my skin went pink. I lay on my couch and kept the television off and listened to the refrigerator's patient motor. When I finally slept, I dreamed a flashlight beam that never found what it sought because it followed a neck that always curved away. I woke up raw. I went to work. I lifted boxes that said fragile in a dozen fonts and a dozen levels of sincerity. Marcus, the young guy who did mornings, told me I looked like I'd lost a bet with a lawnmower. I said I'd be fine. He asked if I wanted one of the cold slices of pepperoni he keeps in the break room fridge like a raccoon with a mini fridge. I said no. By noon, I had convinced myself that whatever I'd seen, it was over. The first day back, it was little things. A sense that someone was standing behind the two-way glass even when a glance showed only a reflection of my own shoulders. A scrape at the metal door behind the dumpsters that could have been wind or a kid with a coin. I told myself not to be a child. I told myself a lot of things. 2 nights later, I locked up late, turned off the last bank of lights, and caught a shape in the corner of my eye. A vertical line that shouldn't have been there. I turned quick enough to make my neck crack. Empty lot. Sodium lamps spotlit the faded stripes. Across the way, a hand car wash sat dark and helpless. And then, 20 yards out, exactly where the light went sickly, something rose. You can recognize a person by the way their weight stacks on their bones. This did not stack right. It lifted itself the way a vine lifts itself on a trellis, flowing more than pushing. It stood, and it was smaller than I remember Edno. Hunched, but there was no mistaking the slick gray of the skin, the shine of the eyes. The neck lifted and reached. The claw hands hung until it flexed them, and the light caught the wet edges. It did not move. Neither did I. The hiss this time barely reached me, like the smallest leak in a tire. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, locked it again, and stood there with my forehead against cold metal until my breath fogged the small window. When I looked again, it was gone. What I could get away with ignoring, I ignored. I worked. I slept badly. Ranger Mark Delaney came into the shop one afternoon, uniform still carrying the smell of the outdoors, buying a roll of stamps for his mother. I asked him if he'd ever heard of Devil's Brook. He said sure and waited for me to make the joke. I didn't. He said the brook dried to a thread by August and that if I wanted to see a fox in daylight, the boardwalk at dawn was the place to be. The night after that, my front window had 3 long scratches from waist height down to the sill. They were the kind of marks that happen when someone drags a bundle of sharpened knives lightly, carefully, across glass. They didn't go through, but I could fit the pad of my finger in each groove. The landlord told me kids were getting bold again. I said sure. I changed my route home 3 times in as many nights. I slept with a baseball bat on the rug beside my bed. I kept waking up at the same time, 3:35, with the sense that someone had just stepped out of view. Twice I went to the sliding balcony door and found it locked the way I'd left it and sat on the floor anyway, my back to the couch, breathing like I had a cold. Once, faint as static, I heard a new sound, tap, tap, tap. The rhythm was wrong for rain. The rhythm was fingernails on glass. I told myself it was branches. On a Thursday, because that seems to be the night my life chooses to tilt. The back door at the plaza rattled 5 times in a row. Hard. I grabbed the bat. My chest thumped hard enough that I felt it in my gums. I turned the deadbolt and pulled. It crouched near the dumpster, as if it had been waiting for me to decide to be stupid. Up close under a human light. The skin had a texture like high-end vinyl. The long neck gave a little sway, almost a quiver, then steadied. Those eyes drank the light and gave nothing back. The blades flexed in and out like they were breathing. I did the dumbest thing I have ever done in a life not short on dumb decisions. I stepped out and closed the door behind me. I don't want trouble, I said. You can imagine how dignified I sounded with my voice scraping high. It moved quick. The bat connected with a noise that was wood hitting something that is not bone, but does not want to be hit. I swung again. The handle tore splinters into my palm. A blade raked my forearm as if it were only peeling a sticker, and the pain was white and immediate in a way that means we are still animals. I stumbled back, and the door kept me from going all the way down. The hiss turned into a shriek. Hyan whistled, and then it scuttled, not ran, not leaped, but scuttled aside and vanished into the slit of dark between two walls. I staggered inside and locked the door. Blood ran warm down to my wrist. I pressed paper towels to it and watched them take on color and rings. There is a kind of man who would go to the ER and tell the truth. I am not that kind. I rinsed with tap water. I butterflied what I could. I used tape we're not supposed to use on people. I swore. I knew. Then, some guilt you can push away by calling it caution. This wasn't that. This was wrong. This was mine. The next morning, the claw marks looked older than they should have. Edges already clean. By lunch, the itch under the new skin was bad enough to make me hiss through my teeth. By evening, the pain had a heat to it, as if something inside the wound wanted out. I called out sick. Marcus texted a shrug emoji and a line about how we'd survive somehow. I sat on the couch with my arm up on a pillow and a glass of cheap bourbon sweating on a coaster and stared at the door like it might do another trick. Once, I laughed at myself out loud. The short laugh that doesn't mean humor. Maybe I'm not an adventurer because I save all my fear for when it counts. I kept seeing it in my head. Not the violence, but a single moment before it, the tilt of the head. The way we recognize attention in other creatures. It had watched me. Not like prey. Not like a thing to be killed for safety. It had watched me as if it were waiting for me to notice something. And I, being human, had not. Somewhere along the way I decided I owed the Brook the courtesy of returning. At dusk, I drove to the preserve. When your mind is already full. A woods at evening is too much. Every rustle insists upon itself. Every small splash in a puddle sounds like a step. I brought the old tackle box out of habit and 2 flashlights out of shame. I brought another can of sardines because I wanted to do a kind thing and because kindness is sometimes a superstition. Standing at Devil's Brook Augustus, if we are allowed to circle back and try again when the thing that went wrong was that simple, I felt that same wrong quiet grow up from the roots. The stone I'd used lay where I'd left it, on the bank where the neck had fallen. A dark stain had already thinned to a tea color where the water licked it. I sat on the log that had been my chair and let time do its slow work. The sky did its trick with blue. Something ticked in the brush where I couldn't see. My arm throbbed. 3 feet to my left. An ant tried to drag a moth wing twice its size across a ridge of moss. 1 more minute passed. Then another. The hiss was soft at first. The sound has a shape. And once you learn it, it fits into the part of your ear that recognizes speech. On the far side of the brook, behind a fallen branch tufted with old leaves, it rose. It was hunched. Smaller. Shoulders rounded. The neck curled into a question mark. The eyes fixed on me. Black and entire. I could feel my throat click as I swallowed. Listen, I said. My voice came out as if I'd borrowed it from a man who'd been a smoker 20 years and gave up last week. I was afraid. You came at me, and I was afraid. I shouldn't have, the word wouldn't attach. I won't hurt you. It angled its head. The neck uncoiled a fraction and eased back. The blades flexed. I reached slowly, the way you do with a stray dog that might or might not be a strain to the tackle box, and took out the sardines. I set them on a flat rock near the water and nudged them with a stick toward a place where current would take the can to its side. It slid forward fast enough that my body flinched before my mind could calm it. It took the can with points that did not tear it, lifted it, brought it close to where a mouth would have been if it had a mouth. A small sound came then, like a breath caught and held. It turned and threw the can into the water. The splash was ridiculous. A can doing exactly what a can does. And yet the sound went off in my head like laughter at a funeral. It hissed hard enough to blur the edges of the leaves. One step forward. The neck lifted. The eyes, God help me, looked hurt. Okay, I said. Not food. This is me trying. We looked at each other for what might have been 20 seconds, or a minute, or a day. Then it melted back into shadow. Not so much stepping as dissolving into it. And whatever I'd come for had not been offered. I went home angry at myself for having expected mercy from a thing I tried to kill, and angrier at myself for having tried it all. I slept poorly. I dreamed that the brook ran through my bedroom and that the water was black with eyes. At 7 the next morning, I went to make coffee and saw what had been left for me. Mud tracked across my balcony lawn. Humanish. With deep gouges where claws should never be stopped by the door. The slider was unlocked. On the kitchen table where I keep my keys and the library book I will not finish on time. A can of sardines waited. Dimpled at the rim where something blade-sharp had gripped it. Message received. There are points at which a man is excused for seeking help. This was one. I drove back to the preserve. Waited outside the ranger office until Delaney arrived in a truck that ticked as it cooled. He is a big man in the gentle way some big men are. Always leaving more space for others in a room than he takes. Morning, he said, because that is his job and his life. To say morning to the unbalanced and the ordinary with the same tone. I saw an animal. I said, odd one. Not a coyote. Not a fox. I stopped. It had long limbs. Gray. I think it might have been injured. He watched my face long enough to decide whether what I'd said came from a place where trouble starts. You leave it alone and call us if you see it again. He said finally, we'll send a wildlife rehab guy. Then, softer, don't go looking for it. I won't, I said, already knowing I would. Because shame is a kind of gravity and it draws you toward the thing you don't want to see again. That night, the bell at the shop door chimed. I looked up from the counter, expecting the usual last-minute drop-off, someone in a panic with a laptop wrapped in a sweatshirt, swearing it has to get there, as if the plane will leave earlier if they swear. The parking lot was empty. The glass held my reflection, older than I expect every time I catch sight of it. Jaw tense. When I turned back, it stood at the end of the counter. There are distances that are safe for looking at something without being looked at back. This was not that. The eyes were level with my sternum, which meant the head had lowered. The neck made a slow wave, like it was gathering itself. The blades rose and fell with a slow, resourceful patience. What do you want? I said. The words came out more prayer than question. It didn't rush. It didn't strike. It lifted one blade hand, those points so clean they made my teeth ache, and extended it toward my forearm. The one where its mark had healed too fast. Light strobed off the glassy edges. It tipped the blade toward the place where the itching had begun. Then it drew the blade back to its own chest and pressed. Me? I said, breathless. You. Me. It pressed its blade to my chest with a firmness that didn't cut. A loveless, unblinking intimacy. There was a prickly jolt like when you touch a doorknob after walking on carpet in your socks. And then a deeper thrum, as if some resonance inside me had been found and wrung. I staggered back.